Well, thank you. It is my first trip to India, and the COP11 to me is an incredible event. My work has focused on responsible tourism, responsible travel, ecotourism. India really is a hot spot of a nascent boom in responsible travel. Good friends run the Blue Yonder, and we're hearing so many good things about how to make tourism uh, much more eco and much more responsible. So, what I hope to get out of this conference is to see what are some of the local applications of sustainable practices, of ecotourism, of including indigenous peoples into the process of a dialogue that really envelops the green economy.
When you talk about ecotourism, tell us about different dimensions of ecotourism, and help us understand how it translates into more sustainable practice.
Well, back in 2002, we had the World Summit on Ecotourism in Quebec. And that said, tourism as a whole has to be greener and much more responsible. We're seeing a number of adjectives put in front of tourism, whether it's responsible tourism or green tourism or ecotourism, or one of my favorites, conscious tourism or conscious travel. The parameters of ecotourism and the like is to include communities and to respect the nature and the place of the environment and to run a financially profitable business. If you have no people in your beds, you really can't run a tourism operation. If you don't have a tourism operation, you cannot comply with some of the social or environmental benefits you'd like to make.
Um, Tourism is looked at a very luxurious thing, by people, by tourists, in general. When you approach them, and request them to visit places and spend a vacation in a more responsible manner, um, how responsive they are.
I would say that very rarely do tourists seek out the responsible tourism operation for a first-time visit. Rarely. I'd like to say it's higher, but it's not. I'd like to say that they're looking for the eco options. They're not. But the return visitors are. Particularly when you're looking at these tourism operations, if they're not being run in a responsible manner, if they're not being run in an eco manner, people not only do they not return, but they start talking negatively about it, and particularly in this age of social web. So we're seeing a dramatic shift, particularly with the new technologies, but also with a new consciousness. Now, before we could talk about consciousness and really mean anything by it, but what we're talking about is not harming the people in the environment and hopefully doing good to it. Uh, that said, it's a very interesting question because, the implications of long haul flights uh, will certainly impact the decisions of the greenest of the green. And, a good friend is saying, if we're truly going to be responsible ecotourist, then we're going to have to cut down our long haul travel. Not to eliminate it completely, but to focus our time accordingly. So for countries like India that depend so much on long haul international travel, it's really going to have to um, walk its own talk and talk its own walk of showing why it matters to have international visitors.
Wonderful. Um, in your area of work, you must have also come across or covered um, tourist companies. Um, how do they respond, and have they been cooperating, and have they really started seriously incorporating sustainability in their tourism business?
I think we're seeing, there is no one size fits all answer to the tourism companies or to to that question. We're seeing irresponsible operators trying to see what they can get away with. We are seeing people who are trying to see how much good they can get away with. Um, this is my first trip to India, so I can't comment too much on specific operations that I haven't seen. The reputation of a company called the Blue Yonder is quite well known around the world. And the question I would ask is to figure out how that the operators who are doing good work figure out how to articulate it more frequently. Also, when we have problems, are we able to voice failure? without saying everything is wrong. Some trips don't work. Some operators don't work. At the same point, right now we have the likes of TripAdvisor, but not much else to make those sorts of criticisms or make those observations. To me, that's the next big task, to be able to get the comments from locals about how they perceive some of these operations.
As per your research and understanding in the sector, um, do you think government compliances and government regulations are actually coming up in different countries? Or you could probably, if you've come across any, you could probably give me an example or two, if government is intervening in terms of any regulation or compliance.
I think what we're seeing, and I've said this for the past 10 years, what we're seeing is that the governments, for the most part, have been operating as competitors within themselves. So, for example, if you want to take care of the environment, you have an environmental ministry. You want to promote tourism, you have a tourism ministry. Rarely do these two entities talk to each other, let alone develop a coordinated policy. I think we're seeing some changes. This COP, the COP11, is having a series of 4 very informative events that connect biodiversity and tourism. But it requires this government cooperation. Are we seeing it? Slowly. Am I disappointed we're not seeing more of it? Certainly. But that I think is the road that we must take. You can't have a virtuous circle without a virtuous government.